What if someone offered you a deal? Free food, a place to live, and protection from your enemies. The catch: you had to give up your family, your religion, your language, and basically your entire way of life. Would you take it? For thousands of Native Americans in Texas, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was the choice they faced when the Spanish returned. And this time, they were here to stay. Last time, we saw how a failed French fort panicked Spain into action. Now, we're going to see what that action looked like. It wasn't about finding gold anymore. It was about changing the soul of Texas itself, one church bell at a time. Get ready for a story of priests, soldiers, and a culture clash that would define Texas for a century. Howdy, history fans, and welcome back. Building an empire is tough work, but so is understanding it. To make sure your historical foundation is solid, go ahead and lay the cornerstone on that subscribe button and ring the mission bell for notifications. It's the best way to join our community of builders. After the La Salle fiasco, Spain knew they couldn't just plant a flag and call Texas theirs. They had to occupy it. Their master plan was the Mission-Presidio System. It was a 1-2 punch designed to colonize the frontier. The mission was the religious heart, run by Franciscan priests or friars. Its job was to convert the local Native Americans to Catholicism and teach them to live like Spaniards. This process was called Hispanization. But the frontier was a dangerous place, so a few miles away from the mission, they would build a presidio. This was a military fort, staffed with Spanish soldiers. The presidio had two main jobs: protect the mission from hostile tribes who weren't interested in converting, like the Apache and Comanche, and protect Spain's claim from the French. They also had to round up any mission Indians who decided they'd had enough of Spanish life and tried to leave. The idea was a three-step process. First, the priests, with the help of soldiers, would convince a local tribe to move into the mission. Second, they would teach them farming, ranching, Spanish, and Catholicism. Finally, after about 10 years, the mission would be secularized, turned into a regular Spanish town, or pueblo, and the Native Americans would become tax-paying Spanish citizens. It was a neat plan on paper, but the reality was far more complicated. So what was daily life actually like for a Native American who joined a mission? It was a life of strict routine, governed by the ringing of the church bell. The day started with prayers and religious instruction, followed by a simple breakfast. Then it was off to work. The men worked in the fields growing corn, beans, and squash, or they learned trades like blacksmithing, carpentry, or masonry. The women would work at spinning wheels, weaving cloth, or making pottery and baskets. This was a massive change from their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They were also expected to give up their own spiritual beliefs, speak only Spanish, and live in permanent adobe houses instead of mobile camps. For many, especially smaller, weaker tribes like the Coahuiltecans, the missions offered protection from the aggressive Apache, but it came at a high cost to their culture. The missions also introduced something else that would change Texas forever: ranching. The Spanish brought cattle, horses, and sheep, and they taught the mission Indians how to manage large herds. These Native American cowboys were the very first vaqueros in Texas, developing the tools and techniques that would later be adopted by Anglo cowboys. The Texas cattle industry started right here. This massive undertaking was led by determined and deeply religious men. One of the first was Fray Damian Massanet. After Alonso de Leon found the ruins of Fort St. Louis, Massanet traveled with him into East Texas. In 1690, he co-founded San Francisco de los Tejas, the very first Spanish mission in East Texas. Massanet was full of hope, but the Caddo people there were powerful and self-sufficient. They weren't interested in a new religion and were soon wiped out by European diseases, so the mission was a failure and had to be abandoned. But the Spanish didn't give up. Years later, another priest, Francisco Hidalgo, was so desperate to return to East Texas that he did something radical. He secretly wrote a letter to the French governor of Louisiana, asking for his help in re-establishing missions. It was a risky move, basically inviting your rival into your territory, but it worked. The Spanish government, terrified of renewed French interest, authorized new missions in East Texas. Perhaps the most famous missionary was Antonio Margil de Jesus. He was a legendary Franciscan known for his extreme piety. He reportedly always walked barefoot and performed harsh penances. After being driven out of East Texas during a conflict, he fled to San Antonio. There, in 1720, he founded what would become the most successful of all the Texas missions, San Jose y San Miguel de Aguayo, often called the Queen of the Missions. Life in Spanish Texas was one of constant conflict, and sometimes that conflict was almost comical. Take the Chicken War of 1719. France and Spain were at war in Europe, and the news trickled down to the colonies. A French corporal in Louisiana, Philippe Blondel, was ordered to invade Texas. He took just 6 soldiers and marched on the nearest Spanish mission in East Texas. The mission was defended by a single priest and 1 soldier, neither of whom knew they were at war. Blondel's invasion was a success, but as he was looting the mission, he tied some chickens to his saddle. The chickens flapped wildly, spooking his horse, which threw him to the ground. In the confusion, the Spanish soldier managed to escape. The soldier ran all the way to the next Presidio, warning everyone that a massive French army was invading. The Spanish commander panicked. Without confirming the story, he ordered the complete abandonment of all East Texas missions. The Spanish packed up and fled all the way to San Antonio, defeated by an army that didn't exist, all because of some rowdy chickens. But the more serious conflict was with the Plains tribes. The Apache, and later the powerful Comanche, were expert horsemen and fierce warriors. They saw the Spanish missions and settlements as an intrusion on their lands and raiding territories. They launched devastating raids on San Antonio and other Spanish sites, stealing horses and cattle and terrorizing the colonists. For decades, Spain was locked in a brutal, bloody cycle of warfare that they could never fully win. The Spanish Colonial Era left a permanent mark on Texas. It gave us the first European towns like San Antonio and Nacogdoches. It introduced ranching, new crops, and the Spanish language. And the missions themselves, like the Alamo, stand today as iconic symbols of our state's history. But it's a complicated legacy. It was also an era of cultural destruction, disease, and violent conflict that forever changed the lives of native Texans. Spain's grip on Texas was never truly secure. The missions succeeded in some areas but failed in others, and the constant warfare with the Plains tribes drained their resources. By the end of the 1700s, new ideas of revolution were sweeping the globe, and a new nation, the United States, was looking west. The stage was being set for even more dramatic changes. Thanks for digging into the Spanish colonial era with us. What part of this complex history do you find most interesting? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because next time, we're diving into the filibusters, revolutionaries, and the cry for independence that will lead to the birth of a new nation. Until then, stay curious.